Last year in 2025, there was an indie game that released that was primarily developed by 2 developers, and that game went on to get an MC score of 89 and overall ranked 11th in the list of best games of 2025, according to Metacritic. It went on to be nominated for 2 major categories at the Game Awards last year, which was Best Debut Indie Game, going against games like Expedition 33 and the Games for Impact category. Do you guys have a best guess as to what game this was? It was Despelote, a first-person narrative game with a runtime of approximately 2 hours. It's an autobiographical game where you play as young Julian living in Quito, Ecuador when the country was competing for a spot in the World Cup back in 2002. It's a game where you largely just run around and you pass a soccer ball to your friends, hear passerby conversations as you roam around town and the neighborhood and go to family gatherings, and you mainly just live the memories of Julian's life during this time as if this game were crafted from the recesses of his childhood memories. And no, there's no puzzles, there's no dialogue options, there's no quick time reactions, there's not even a game over or any kind of fail states to be had in this game. And by this definition, a lot of people would say that Despelote is not a video game, even though it's an award-winning game that The Guardian says recalls some of the great works of independent narrative game design. Personally, having played the game myself and talked about it a few times after the game release, I don't recall Despelote really being questioned on whether it should be called a video game or not. Yet Despelote stands in stark contrast to the conversations happening around a title like Mixtape, a game I would argue is similar in nature that just came out at the beginning of this month, with people vehemently denying that Mixtape should ever be considered a video game. So what exactly gives? Let's talk about it, shall we? Hi, if you're new here, my name is Anna, and on this channel we talk about all things video games. We discuss games from narrative to gameplay to community perspectives. So yes, this game Mixtape came out at the beginning of May, and I feel like when it released shortly after, it was the talk of the town and there was a lot of buzz around this game. We'll of course get to all the discourse surrounding Mixtape in this video, but first I wanted to explain what exactly is Mixtape if you haven't played the game yourself yet. So Mixtape is a narrative adventure game where you play as 3 teenagers who are experiencing their last night together in their hometown. So the protagonist, Stacy Rockford, has dreams of becoming a music supervisor, and to do that she has to move to New York and leave behind her friends in her hometown back in California. At least I think it's in Northern California, and we are experiencing the final days she gets to spend with her best friends, and throughout spending that day together, the friends recall a lot of the memories they had spending their teenage years together, getting into shenanigans. They recall doing things like teeping their teacher's house, or getting drunk and going to the DVD store, or running away from the cops a night when the cops busted one of the parties they went to. This game doesn't have a ton of gameplay. It's mostly put together by a lot of like cinematic sequences, and it's a game that a lot of people would consider like a walking simulator because you don't really do anything beyond just like going through the set pieces in this game, living through memories, and the game demands very little gameplay. Like you do things like walk and talk to people, but that's pretty much it. There are certain gameplay moments like making a slushie or like skipping stones, but that's pretty much the extent of its gameplay. And of course the game is called Mixtape, so a lot of the game revolves around music. The way that the game is structured is that the major gameplay sequences that happen in this game revolve around like a track. So for example, in one of the scenes, you go through the entire town riding in like a shopping cart, blasting music to one of the tracks. So the music is basically setting the tone for each of the major sections in the game. And I was able to beat Mixtape in around 3-ish hours. To quickly give my review of Mixtape, the reason why I was excited for it was because when I saw the game in a trailer at last year's Summer Games Fest, I was really into the art style. I thought the art style of this game was beautiful. It kind of looks like that Spider-Verse K-pop Demon Hunters kind of animation. So I was immediately drawn to the art style, but also when I saw the list of featured bands on the soundtrack, I thought it was crazy how they got this really extensive list of bands to be included in the soundtrack. And I thought that was crazy because obviously you don't see a lot of like high profile popular bands in video game soundtracks. So I was like, oh, this sounds really interesting to me. And I grew up playing the guitar, and I just love music that have really good guitar sounds and tones, whether that's rock, metal, alternative, indie. Like I just love songs with guitars in it. So, of course, I was very immediately drawn to the premise of this game and how music was such a central focus of this game. So, I have personally been excited for Mixtape to come out since it was basically announced. And having played the game myself, I'd say for the highlights for me with this game was that I think, first off, yes, the soundtrack was definitely the biggest highlight. Like, it was so cool seeing how the different parts of this game revolved around the individual tracks that was curated for this game, and I thought it was so cool how the music dictated what exactly you were playing through. It was cool how they like cinematically put together these set pieces that revolved around the music's tone and mood, and I think that was a cool way to tie memories with the music that was incorporated into the game. I'm not going to spoil anything, but the ending unexpectedly did make me cry, because what the game was able to do really well was not just convey the feeling of like nostalgia, but also it was really good at reminding me of these feelings of leaving something behind, leaving your hometown to pursue your dreams, and you know how much of a bittersweet feeling that could be. Me personally, when I graduated high school, I wanted to leave everything behind. I was so ready to go to college and leave my family and my friends and just get on with the rest of my life, because I felt like there was so much for me out there. But at the same time, even though I may have had bitter feelings about shitty things that happened back home, it was still a bittersweet feeling to leave those things, because they're still a huge part of you, a huge part of your life and your past and your own development and personality. And I felt like the game did a really good job of that, of how Stacy really wanted to live out her dreams as a music supervisor and had big dreams to do that. But she was still sad about leaving her friends behind, because they were so precious to her. And it really carried the feeling of like, this is it. This is going to be our last night together, and we have to make the most of it and remember and cherish these memories for the rest of our lives. And like I said, I thought the game was gorgeous already, and I did think that that was a big highlight of me playing through this game. I just thought that the art was beautiful, and I love like the kind of style they went for with these characters and the environments. It felt very cozy to me. The aesthetic of the town and just the way it reminded me of like Northern California felt comforting to me as someone who is from Southern California but spent a lot of days in NorCal. In terms of criticisms for the game, I will say that I think that narrative games in general that have a runtime of like pretty short runtime of like 2 to 3 hours, I always think that there's limitations to how good games like this can be. Like, I'm personally okay with games that offer short runtimes as long as they can deliver a meaningful experience. And I definitely think that there are story games out there that could be a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, but usually I think that when they are shorter and have like a more shallower gameplay experience, it's really hard to meet like a 10 out of 10 masterpiece criteria for me. It's just very unlikely for that to happen, and I think I felt that way about Mixtape. I would say that I think it was worth my time and I enjoyed it, and I like the kind of feelings it was able to evoke in me. But to put it in the same camp as the games I consider to be 10 out of 10s, it's not even close. But that is not to say that the game was bad. I think I enjoyed it for what it was. I know a major criticism for the game is the corny and cheesy dialogue, but I actually kind of find that charming, because I think it's so corny that it's actually kind of funny, kind of in the same way of like Life is Strange, where I think some of the dialogue that Max has can be really cringe, but I think now it kind of has a charm to it because it's just so cringe that it's just honestly more funny than anything. I also want to talk about how white suburban culture is a major focus for this game, and while I don't think that point is necessarily a criticism for the game, I don't think that perspective is that interesting in offering more of a valuable experience for the player. I don't think stories you consume have to be relatable each time you experience them. Like, I don't think you need to be a white teenager from America to enjoy a story like Mixtape. But at the same time, I personally think that stories that have more diverse and cultural perspective to them, I think that those stories are just more interesting. And I think that learning about those things, I place a lot of value in. Like with a game like Despelote, I thought it was super interesting learning about like daily life in Ecuador and what the feeling of being in a city like that during that time must have felt like. A game like Until Then, I personally didn't connect to the story very much or the characters, but I super appreciated learning about Filipino culture. Even though I didn't really appreciate the story as much, I was able to still take away a lot of value from learning about Filipino culture playing that game. As a side note, I think it's really funny when people look at this game and think it's like woke liberal shit, because it's actually like not woke at all. There's nothing woke about it. I'm pretty sure all three main characters are white. I think Cassandra might be mixed. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure her mom is like this white Southern lady. So yeah, regardless of what I say, Mixtape was very highly rated. It currently has an 86 on Metacritic. And generally, I do recommend playing it. I think it's worth people's time, but I think I would say play it for what it is. Like, don't expect some insanely life-changing story. After hearing what the game is and watching the trailers, I think you should generally know what to expect. So don't expect anything too out of the box when playing the game. So now that I've explained Mixtape, it seems like a pretty simple game, right? Like a narrative adventure about a bunch of kids, and I think that if you existed in a vacuum and you were just completely offline and don't go on the internet, you would think that this is just another game that comes and goes, and that's really it. You would have not guessed that it stirred up so much drama this past month, because what is there to even talk about when it comes to this game, right? And I think the whole controversy with Mixtape started with IGN giving Mixtape a 10 out of 10 score. And as much as gamers want to say that they don't care about IGN scores in 2026, they obviously do care, considering how much drama happened after this game got a 10 out of 10. And I think this is where everything started. I think that if this game just existed in its own bubble and it wasn't reviewed by all the major outlets, who were also, a lot of them were giving this game at a 10 out of 10, I think it could have just existed in its own happy bubble, much like Despelote. That game wasn't even reviewed by IGN, so I think that, you know, it could have just been a game that comes and goes, like I said. But because it was reviewed by so many major outlets and them giving this game pretty much a flawless score, it caused a lot of drama, and giving Mixtape a bunch of 10 out of 10s on these gaming websites led to people being frustrated, because I think a lot of people would not consider Mixtape to be really a video game and more of an interactive movie. And of course, people don't want to see an interactive movie getting the same scores as some of the best games in the world that have very deep gameplay experiences and mechanics and stuff like that. Seeing all the journalism and review score discourse, I think one thing that I would like to see, and I don't know if a gaming site does this, is that I wish that there was like a site that reviews games not by a single score, but by like certain scores for each component of a video game, like the things that matter in their review. Like, is there a gaming site that, I don't know, gives like a 10 for music, and then for gameplay they give like a 5, and then for story they gave like an 8? Like, that would be so much more of a helpful way to understand the reception of a game. And I think this would also just get rid of a lot of the controversy when it comes to reviewing games. But that's just my take. I just think a score breakdown would be a little bit helpful for me too, to understand why things would be given a 10. And by the way, I don't really care if people like absolutely hated this game and had a lot to criticize for it. Like, there's a lot of people who are gonna find like the dialogue to be super cringe and corny and hate the characters and whatever. I think that's fine. But I think what I mostly had a problem with is people approaching this game with bad faith because of the controversy surrounding it, or just wanting to hate the game without even playing it yourself. Like, I don't think that you really have a seat at the table for conversation around this game if you have played 0 minutes of it. I did read a couple of the sites that gave Mixtape a 10 out of 10 or 5 out of 5 stars, and the game resonating with these reviewers is a big reason why they gave 10 out of 10s, which I can understand that. But the more I read these reviews, I think it was more of a reflection of representation in games journalism, or lack thereof. While I'm not a conspiracy theorist going down a hole thinking like, how can these reviewers give Mixtape a 10 despite not agreeing with that score myself, what I questioned more was, is this more of a reflection of how predominantly white gaming journalism is? Because this game is so rooted in white suburban culture. In other words, if we could know for sure that there was a good amount of diversity amongst the reviewers who were giving these scores out, the scores that mattered for Metacritic, would we have seen as many 10 out of 10 scores for Mixtape? Maybe, maybe not. I'm not one to go and background check every person who reviewed this game and gave it a flawless score to check that. But that was my first thought after seeing a lot of people give this score to this game. There was other discussion around this game, you know, questioning whether it could be considered like an indie game and other things like that, but we're not going to focus on that. So I want to keep the focus on the conversation of what I think is the central thing that people have beef with of should this game be considered a video game. Now, I do want to talk about this whole debate of video game versus interactive movie a little bit separately from Mixtape and talk about it more generally, because I do think it's a topic that comes up pretty often as gaming as a medium evolves over time. So let's just start with what is a video game and how I would define it. And I think that my definition of a game is actually a hot take. I know people disagree with it, but my general definition is a game is a video game if there is interactivity, and that's really it. I'm quite liberal with my definition of a video game. I don't think that games really need fail states or some kind of specific mechanic. I don't think there needs to be dialogue options, and I don't think that there needs to be much agency in general for a video game to be a video game, and it could just have interactivity, and that's really it. And I've asked this question to my audience before of how you would define a video game and how you would define interactive movies apart from that. It was about a year ago when there was like obviously less drama surrounding the debate, so I think I was able to have less heated discussions around this debate in general. And that conversation started with me addressing that 1000 Times Resist, one of my favorite indie games of all time that I talk about, is basically a walking/talking simulator with zero combat. And that led to the topic of discussion: walking, talking, and reading simulators aren't games and should be classified as something else than a video game. This is a point that someone else wanted to bring up, and I pretty much completely disagreed, and I can summarize what my main points are here. My first major argument was that I think this is reliant on quite an archaic way of what constitutes a video game. Back then, when video games were still relatively new, I think that there were expectations for what a video game should include. Things like combat or certain mechanics, some kind of movement that a character can make. But I think because video games as a medium has expanded so much beyond that, I think that the very definition of a video game has expanded as well. There's so many games out there that have zero combat. There are so many games out there that don't have game over or fail states, which is why I think that because the medium is evolving so much, there's no real way to define a video game by a certain criteria like this. And kind of related to that point, my second major point was I wanted to say that gaming has just evolved as a medium for storytelling and art. And that doesn't necessarily always have to mean for consumption. I basically compared it to like how an artist paints a painting and how a musician creates music, and how art like that doesn't necessarily always have to have the consumer in mind. I think video games can be similar. I think a game like Despelote, for example, I think is a game that doesn't necessarily keep the player always in mind. I think that it doesn't offer much gameplay experience, and it's mostly like walking through the memories of someone's childhood. I think Despelote is a way to tell someone's story in a way that a book or a film can't, because you're literally in the shoes of this person, walking through their brain of how they remembered these memories and reliving the sounds that they heard in their neighborhood and how adults talked to each other as they were still children. I don't think this kind of game necessarily is looking to maximize the consumer experience. To me, video games has just evolved to be more so a medium for sharing your story, for sharing creativity, for sharing art, moving away from it always having to cater to the player experience. And then my third major point was I think a lot of these games, as much as people want to argue that they're more so interactive movies, I think that a lot of these experiences would still be diluted if they were movies rather than games. Like, there are still choices you make in Mixtape, things that you do in the game that makes it different from how you would experience them in a film. Certain things that you do in the game that shapes the experience a little bit differently than if you had zero agency at all just watching a film. There are certain decisions you still make that changes the emotional impact of certain scenes and certain sequences. The ending of Mixtape really convinced me of that, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but if there was no interactivity at that point of the ending, I don't think it would have made me cry. I don't think I would have had the same kind of emotional connection to that moment in the game. I think a game like Mouthwashing is also another example of the different ways that you change perspectives in that game has huge emotional impact to the storytelling of that game, even though, again, it is kind of like a walking simulator. And going back to Despelote, that is definitely a game that would be not the same if it were a film. I think it's a game because being able to basically walk through the town as this kid remembered it literally feels like you're walking through his memories, and the feeling can be so different if you're not exactly in the person's shoes. Being able to walk around the neighborhood and hear sounds of the guitar getting closer because you hear someone in the distance playing on the streets, or hearing the kids play, being able to go around the park and hear all of those things gives it a different experience than seeing someone else do that in like a movie. And I think these are experiences that only video games can offer, so why wouldn't we call it a video game? I did get some interesting comments in reply to this video where I brought all of those points up that I kind of want to just go through. I did something similar when I made my video talking about turn-based games and all the arguments as to why people hate turn-based games, so I want to do the same and just go through some major points here. This person said, people say this because they want to discredit people who play a certain type of game, or usually women who don't play the games they play. It's a way for them to say, see, you aren't a gamer because you don't play this. I kind of appreciate this comment for just saying it as it is. I think there is a level of gatekeeping when it comes to labeling things as video games. I think there are people out there who would say that people who only play games like Mixtape, they're not really a gamer. So yeah, I think that there is a level of superiority or gatekeeping involved in this whole like debate over labeling things as video games. I see a couple comments here that also are disagreeing with me because they think that I am disregarding genre labels. That is not what I am really saying. I think it is totally fair to, label things pertaining to their genre like FPS, story rich, tactical, turn-based. I think that is a separate thing from what I am arguing for. I am basically arguing for a lot of these games to be called a video game in the first place. Like, I think that story-rich games, visual novels, walking simulators, talking simulators, like they are all considered video games, and I'm not disregarding labels for genres at all. I'm just saying all those things should be still called video games. This one's kind of funny. It says, for me, it's as simple as the verbs we use. I didn't watch Monkey Island. I didn't read it or eat it either. I played it. I had fun trying stuff. I dawdled. I inspected. I thought about stuff. I pressed buttons that corresponded to what I wanted to happen in the game. I played it. That's as simple as it gets for me personally as well. Some other points I also wanted to bring up was, first, I think people will say that it is important to distinguish a video game from what they would consider an interactive movie because this distinction is important for informing purchase decisions. And I think this argument isn't as strong. I think that in general, a lot of people who buy games like Mixtape know what they're getting. Like if you watch the trailers and read the description, I think generally the people who bought this game knew the kind of experience they were getting, where there wasn't super robust gameplay, plenty of cinematic sequences, and not like really like things like combat or anything like that. So I think the whole distinction away from this game being considered a video game is less important for people who know what they're purchasing and what they're getting into. And I guess that is on part for the consumer to do research and educate themselves a little bit more into what they're buying. But yeah, I think that it's in general a little bit of a weak argument. And lastly, I think that this whole term is important to people, and why the debates around this get so heated is because people still care so much about the Game Awards and these types of games being in competition with their other favorite games. It reminds me of when Expedition 33 came out, and a lot of people hated thinking that this was going to be nominated and sweep the Game Awards because people just didn't want to see turn-based games win the Game Awards because it's just a genre that many people hate. In the same way, people obviously don't want to see a game that they barely consider to be a video game be in competition with something like Resident Evil Requiem. And while I don't agree with Mixtape specifically being in the same nomination category as like a Resident Evil Requiem fighting for Game of the Year, I do think that narrative games with limited gameplay experiences can hold a candle to games with robust and deep gameplay experiences. And I think if you don't agree with that, I think that is kind of a self-report that you might have like a limited palette when it comes to trying a variety of games. Like, I do think a person who plays games like Mixtape, Despelote, Mouthwashing, 1000 Times Resist, they can understand better how a game that doesn't have much gameplay but has like a very narrative rich experience and can offer a compelling experience like that. They can understand how games like that can offer incredible experiences just as much as games that deliver compelling experiences through robust gameplay mostly. Like I said before, I think that video games as a medium is always evolving, and because it's always evolving, the definition of a video game is expanding more and more. And as we become more creative with the medium, this is only going to get more arbitrary of how you define what is a video game. So the debates are never really going to end. But I think the more I thought about this debate, the only conclusion I could really conclusively get to is that if I got value out of that experience, does it really matter? Like, if I got value out of the experience of playing Mixtape, does it really matter if it's called an interactive movie or a video game? To me, personally, really the only experience I should be caring about, my own. Does it really matter whether someone is arguing that it's not a video game? And I think this whole experience has just been personally eye-opening to me, that things are just better experienced offline and in a vacuum. I think that's the one thing I regret about this game. Like, I wish I didn't read all the discourse online about this, because I genuinely think that made me a little bit sour to talk about this game. It was just really exhausting reading all the discourse on it. And I think it was just a personal learning lesson that I think I should enjoy things on my own a little bit more. Anyway, that's all I have to say on this video. If you guys have any opinions on this topic, whether it's talking about Mixtape or this debate between video game or interactive movie at all, please leave them in the comments below for me as always. And thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye!